Allie here with my sidekick Dabby, and today I'm doing a little bit different of a video. I am talking about why, if you look at my shelf, I kind of look like a serial first book reader. This video actually probably would have been better if I had done it a couple years ago, because this isn't the case as much as it used to be. But to understand why I have so many unfinished series on my bookshelf, I'm going to have to go back into when I really started reading again. So if you watched my BookTube newbie tag, you heard me say that it was about a year or so after I read The Hunger Games that I really started reading again. Now, the thing about that is when the first Hunger Games movie was coming out, Barnes & Noble was doing a special where if you bought a Nook on one specific day, you would get a ticket to see the Hunger Games like about 24 hours before it came out, a little bit more than 24 hours before it came out. At this point, I was completely obsessed with the Hunger Games, so I did it. So I went to the store and I got my Nook and I got a case that made it look like a book because I had always been completely against ebook readers and I wanted physical copies and I was never going to get one. Shortly after getting this, well, no, it was still a couple months, but then I started reading again, and I was reading everything on my Nook. I first read the Divergent series on my Nook, and then I read Delirium and Matched, and lo and behold, the day Requiem was coming out, Lauren Oliver came to Washington, D.C., where I lived at the time, and I needed a book for her to sign. So I bought just the first book to buy, even though I had already purchased it on my Nook. And then shortly after that, Ali Condi was coming to DC. And again, I had read her book on my Nook, so I didn't have a physical copy of any of them, even though I had read all of them. But once again, I purchased a second copy of just the first one to have signed. Later that same year, I believe, I hosted an online convention, which that's a whole story in itself that maybe I'll tell someday. But I hosted an online convention and I ended up interviewing Lauren Oliver for the second time. There were other people that were like online for the interview. And in that interview, somebody asked her about YALLFest. I had never heard of YALLFest before, but apparently, I say that in quotes because now I've been to YALLFest 4 times. Apparently it was this convention in South Carolina where a whole bunch of YA authors come together and talk and do panels and sign books, and I was like, wait a second, this sounds awesome. So I went, but of course my first year there, all of the authors who I had read at that point, I didn't have their books because I was only reading on my Nook at this point in my life. From that point on, there are a whole bunch of books I have here that are basically the second copy I purchased of the book because I read them on my Nook. Legend, only have the first one. Divergent, I would only have the first one. I ended up getting the second one from a student as a gift because I didn't have it. I don't know if that one's actually signed, but this one is. City of Bones, I have the entire Infernal Devices series unsigned, which I think I also purchased after I read them. I needed that series on my shelf. But this one is the only Mortal Instruments book I have. Then for my second year at YALLFest, I got a little bit smarter. I started buying the author's next book immediately so that I would have a physical book, which is how I ended up with The Elite, because I had read the selection, I hadn't read The Elite yet, and I was like, okay, well, let's buy a physical copy of it since I'm gonna buy it anyway, and then it can get signed. Then that series was too good, so I ended up wanting the whole thing on my shelf. Selection. I will say some of them I ended up having the whole series on my shelf just because I felt like I needed it. That was the case with The Hunger Games, which I also read before I owned The Lunar Chronicles. I read that whole series before I had them on my shelf. The Uglies I had on my Nook, and then I got those at a resale store. So that one I at least didn't pay full price for. I still bought 2 copies of them. But this isn't just the case with series. It's also the case with authors. For example, Rainbow Rowell. I read Fangirl. I absolutely loved it. I read it on my Nook, but Eleanor and Park is the only one I physically own because this was in that transition time when I'm like, oh, well, I'm gonna see the author at some point, so I need a physical book, so I'm gonna buy the one I haven't read yet and get that, which is similar with the selection. John Green, for a while, the only John Green book I had was An Abundance of Catherines, which is probably my least favorite of his books, but I had read all of the rest on my Nook. Finally, I did end up buying a used copy of The Fault in Our Stars, which was in really good shape because I needed that book on my shelf. And that one, I don't know if you can see it in here, but it's over here. And yeah, I needed that book on my shelf. Lauren Oliver, I talked about her earlier. I have Delirium and Pandemonium, which I was given from a friend who ended up with 2 copies of it. But the only of her independent novels I have is Panic, which I do love, but again, I've read all of her independent novels except Replica, and this is the only one I have on my shelf because I read most of them when I was reading everything on my Nook. Now, at one point, I started looking at my shelf and realizing 2 things. Number 1, it was depressing how much I was reading and how few things I had on my bookshelves. I think I only had 1 bookshelf at the time, and it's none of these that are behind me, actually. It's one that currently holds my DVDs. And it wasn't full. I was like, I have read so much recently and it looks like I haven't, so I want to start buying books. Number 2, I was going to YALLFest every year and I was having to buy second copies of these books because I was reading them all on my Nook and then going and getting them signed. So I was spending double the money. So I was like, no, I'm just going to buy physical copies and then I'll have them and I'll bring them to YALLFest when I'm ready. And I won't have to go and buy 20 books right before YALLFest that I already bought when they came out. That makes sense, right? But now I keep having to buy bookcases. I don't now. I'm gonna do a bookshelf tour at some point, and I do have a lot of empty space, mostly thanks to my brother giving me 2 full bookcases when he moved. So now I actually have kind of the opposite problem. Anytime a book is coming out, I feel like I need to buy a physical copy of it, even though it is less expensive to get on my Nook, and some of them I'm never going to get signed. For example, Rick Riordan only signs his new books. So if he was not coming to me on tour, his book wasn't getting signed, which I do have the first Magnus Chase book signed. But then when I went to get the second one, I was like, yay, physical books, even though I was never going to have that book signed. I still have it, and my bookshelves are not empty anymore, which is great. Gail Forman's another one where I have read every book she's ever written, but on my shelf I only have Just One Day, which I purchased after reading If I Stay, but I hadn't read Just One Day yet. That was in my like, okay, well let's buy a book I haven't read from her yet and get it signed time. And I was here because that one is her most recent and it came out in my I'm buying everything period of time. The nice thing is almost every book on my bookshelf is signed. Almost every one. When I do my bookshelf tour, I will go through what's signed and what's not as well. But the books that are on my shelf, I think my original Harry Potter books are not signed. The Infernal Devices is not signed. The Hunger Games, unfortunately, is not signed. And Twilight is not signed, though I could have done that, but maybe I'll talk about that someday too. And my John Green books aren't signed. I do have the autograph, but not on a book. I do have some unfinished series on my shelf that are actually unfinished series, but that's rare. This year being like 2016 was the first time I've ever not bought the next book in a series like immediately, and that was the case with Dorothy Must Die, that series, which I still haven't bought the 3rd or now the 4th book is out, I believe, for that series, and I might, I'm not sure if I will, we'll see. And then The Young Elites, I didn't love the 2nd book. I did finally audiobook the 3rd one. I enjoyed it. I don't think I need to purchase it and put it on my shelf, so that might stay an unfinished series, but it's in good company because I have a bunch of unfinished series, even though I have finished the series but they're unfinished on my shelf. Am I making sense? And then the next Magnus Chase book, I've tried 2 or 3 times to get through it and I just can't. I'll talk about that for a second time in my March wrap up. The next book in the Magisterium series by Cassandra Clare and Holly Black. I have the 3rd book in that series. I've read the first 2. I plan to read it at some point. I just haven't yet. But I believe those are the only series that I've pretty much ever gotten through the first book and not finished, unless, like, The Giver counts. My bookshelves appreciate that I've started buying physical books. My wallet might not, although I think it also does because now I don't have to re-buy them to get them signed because I already have them, which is great. And I'm getting actual use out of it because most of those autographed books that I bought as second copies have never been read. Or it's really funny when I hand a book to somebody and I'm like, here's my copy. I love this series. It's signed and this book has never been read. I still do have second copies of books though. Like, I had an arc of 6 of Crows that I borrowed from somebody, but I still have 6 of Crows. Yay! I did read my copy of Cricket Kingdom though. And then obviously I have unfinished series if the series is unfinished, but that doesn't count. All my Sarah J. Maas are unfinished, but they won't be. And same with like Ember and the Ashes, but I will finish that series, I hope. Anyway, now I'm just rambling, but that is why I look like a serial first book reader, or at least I used to look like a serial first book reader, because they were signed and second copies of books, and now I just buy everything because I love books, and I love autographs, and I love Y'all Fest, and I love New York Comic Con. I love things. If you like this video, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. You can always follow me on Twitter at ReaderGonnaRead and check out some of my other videos. I'm gonna go read. I will talk to you next time. Bye! I know, Dobby, I know. It's terrible. And they're all signed too. Hey, Ellie and Dobby here. Like the video? Come subscribe. Do it right now. Click it.